Okay, so we're starting today with chapter four, and chapter four is really the where this class kind of takes a turn and moves forward in a way that like no other class that you've had is going to do, and it's because we're going to look at not just how people do business differently in different countries. It's about why people behave differently when they're from different countries, and this is a class all about the meaning and dimensions of culture. So what it means, why culture exists, and how we define it, and then how we can think about it in different ways. So um, one of the first things that we want to think about is define it and compare, and then we want to talk about values. So that's something that we're going to get in today. Um, a big part of this class today on this lecture online is about values. Okay, so let's start by defining culture. Culture is essentially acquired knowledge, and it's knowledge that you acquire from other people, other things that you use to interpret what it is that's happening around you. And that knowledge is not something that a newcomer to a particular culture or nation is going to have. They're going to see things and they're not going to be able to interpret and understand what's happening. So, culture is acquired knowledge. You have to be in a culture and understand it and live it in order to interpret what's going on around you and to understand social behavior. So, this is really the power. And what this acquired knowledge does is it kind of turns you into a certain person. It turns you into a certain person with certain values, that has certain attitudes, and that behaves in certain ways. So people in America behave differently than people in China. They have different values and they have different attitudes, and that's the way it is for all over the world. And so it's really, really powerful in that way. And so one way that I like for us to think about culture is to think about this handshake. All right, you guys have all shook hands with other people, and you may even step back and say, "Why do I shake hands? What makes me reach out and want to shake hands with someone else?" And obviously, this is something that you learn in Western cultures, particularly European cultures, um, that has to do with being friendly or doing business with people, but it's not something that people do in many other cultures around the world. So when you step back and say, "Why do I shake hands?" This is something that you learn from other people, and it's unique to our own Western culture. Now, if you want to step back even further and say, where did this come about? Why did we shake hands? Why did we reach out and touch someone when we make a deal or when we greet them? And if you think about the origins of this, the origins have to do with you hold out your right hand and show the other person that you don't have a weapon in it. And so that's where the handshake originally came from. I don't have a weapon. Now, that's obviously not why you shake hands at a job interview, to show someone you're not going to attack them. That's not it. But it's become that. So the handshake is really interesting. It's really interesting example to view culture in general and to view the characteristics of culture. And I want to go over these real quick. So first of all, culture is learned. You learn it from other people. You're not born with knowledge of culture. So if you were to happen to be born in another country, you would have learned a completely different culture. If you were born in Japan, you would not shake people's hands. It just wouldn't happen. You don't touch other people. You don't invade their space in that way. And then if you were born in, let's say, South America, you might give people kisses when you meet them. Kiss them twice. See, whether it's a man or a woman, that might be how you greet. So it's different, but you learn how to do these things. Second, a culture is shared. That means other people have the same kind of culture as you in that particular nation or whatever cultural constraints that you have. So you're not the only person in the United States that goes up to shake people's hands. Almost everybody does it, and you share it, and that gives meaning to it. All right? Culture is transgenerational, which means your grandparents probably shook hands too, and you learned from them to shake hands, and they probably told you how to behave in many, many different ways. And they taught your parents how to behave in many different ways. And then your parents taught you. So culture is passed down. A culture is symbolic, which means that certain things don't mean what they appear to mean to outsiders. So a great example of that is the flag. Like, for instance, I'll talk about in class, this person wanted to burn a flag on LSU campus, and other people from other places might look at this and say, so what? You can burn a flag. That's not a big deal. You have your right to burn a flag in the United States. And other people say, no, that flag is not just cotton and dye. It's a meaningful representation or symbolically representative of the patriotism that people had in this country, that fought in wars for freedom, or soldiers that died for us, or how we founded this country. So to burn a flag means symbolically much worse than just burning a shirt. Culture is patterned, which means there's multiple steps that go into any sort of act that you do. You say hello to someone, and they don't just walk by. They know to stop and to start and to chat with you a little bit. Or you hold out your right hand to someone, and they know to hold their hand out too, to grab it and to shake it. So there's all these patterns. It's not just one-off behaviors. There's multiple things that happen. And then finally, culture is adaptive, and that means it does slightly change over time. Example of this might be, we might talk about same-sex marriage at LSU. 60 years ago, we might ask a business school class, raise your hand if you are in agreement with same-sex marriage. And, we might think about that in the 50s or the 60s, how many people would raise their hands? It just wouldn't be a lot. And if we asked that question nowadays, we would see more hands. We wouldn't see everybody's hand go up, but we would see more hands than we saw. And that's the interesting part about culture. When we have these issues that we deal with between maybe generations, the younger generations wants immediate and fast change. What younger generations don't realize when they want to change cultural values is that cultural values take time to adapt. The values that your grandparents have, they're not just going to throw them out overnight just because they're old. They're going to hold on to them. And so change takes time because culture is pretty solid. It's moldable. It's adaptive, but it doesn't just change overnight. It takes a long time to change culture. That's one of the things that gives it strength. So in that way, I want you guys to know exactly what those characteristics of culture are. All right. And so one of the things that I want to bring up here, and the reason that I talk about American culture first, and now I'm going to get into some other different cultures, is because culture is probably the thing we share the most as Americans. It's the thing that we have most in common. And in fact, we have so much in common with other people that we generally don't even think about it. It's really interesting as far as humans go. We like to talk about the things that make us different and differentiate us, or argue about things where we don't agree. When we do agree, there's not a lot to talk about. And when we agree deep down into our core, there's almost nothing to talk about. So the values that we have as Americans, we kind of take for granted that we all share them. And this next slide that I want to show you, this is probably the most important slide. I'm going to go over it in class, but I want to point out a few things here. This is a slide that shows data from 3 different regions of the world in what they rank as their most important values. This is the United States, Japan or China or Asia, we'll call that Asia, and Arab countries. A study was done, and this was a bunch of studies. It wasn't just like one. It was thousands and hundreds of thousands of responses about what are the most important values in your culture. And here's what they are for the United States. Freedom, independence, and self-reliance. Those are the things that Americans value more than anything. Freedom. We love our freedom. We value it as the most important thing. In fact, we say without freedom and independence, what do you have? All right? And I'm going to show you what you have, and I'm going to show you kind of interesting it is that we think like that. We also value self-reliance and individualism and competition, which is kind of that American dream that you work hard and you can get what you want. So these are all values that the United States put as. You could name any value that you wanted, and these time and time again came up as the tops for the United States. What's interesting and why I want to talk about this slide a little bit more is that when you ask Japanese that, they say a completely different set. They say in Asian cultures, belonging to a group and having harmony in a group, being part of a group, having old people in a group, are the most important things. So they're the most important values. You don't see freedom anywhere up here. You don't see independence anywhere up here. And so to Japanese, to Chinese, to many Eastern Asians, the concept of freedom it's an important concept, but it's way down here. It's maybe in the top 20 or top 30. But belonging to a group is much more important than having good relations with people in your group. That's so foreign to us in the United States to have that. And then the reason that I have Arab countries up here is because I want to show you the value values that Arab countries have. And what you see is a third set of completely different values. Arab countries value family and parents and having authority and age. So old people tell young people what to do. If you're in an Arab country, following what your parents tell you to do is so important. Age and seniority is so important. And so we see that we have a lot of differences here between what Arab countries, what Japanese and Chinese and Asian countries, and then Western North American countries. There's differences, complete differences in the culture, and it drives all of our behavior, and it's really difficult for us to think that freedom is not seen in the same light in Japan and other countries as it is in our country. Because we kind of say, what do you have if you don't have freedom? Whereas Arab countries say, what do you have if you don't have family security and family harmony? And Japanese say, well, what do you have if you don't have belonging to a group and group harmony and a group that gets along? United States, we don't have that. We have television shows like Real Housewives and, any reality TV show that you see. That's the exact opposite of belonging to a group and group harmony. The show is all about group conflict and not belonging and fighting. Right? And we have such alienated parent-child relationships in this country. Family is something that's important to people, but it's not more important than freedom or independence as it is. So really you get to the core of what cultural values are. And one of the things that I want to point out here is we must understand these differences. We must understand what people in different cultures value. Otherwise, we won't be able to understand them as people at all. We certainly won't be able to manage them, to hire them, to lead them, and to do business with them. So you have to, whether you agree with the values, doesn't matter. You need to know what they are and then know how you'll manage based on that. Okay, so let's dig into that just a little bit more. Let's think about how these concepts affect management. So one way that we can have differences is centralized versus decentralized decision making, depending on what your values are. In some societies, top managers make all the decisions, and in other societies, decisions are diffused throughout the kind of middle and lower level management. This is kind of what it looks like in the United States. We have more decentralized decision making. In some countries, safety is much more important than risk. Right? In the United States, in England, we are much more risk oriented. We are entrepreneurs. We start businesses. We are bankers. Deal with economic ups and downs. Wall Street. That's all risk. Those are things that don't exist in a lot of other countries. Okay, because of our appetite for risk. Individual versus group rewards. This is another thing that we see. In some countries, you reward the entire group, no matter who does what. No matter if there's a superstar there or not, everybody gets paid the same if they do well. That's not how it is in the United States. That is not how we are. We reward individuals, and individual stars are thought of as the most appropriate light. Informal procedures versus formal procedures. This is culture reflects and influences how much you write stuff down, how rigidly things are followed. In the United States, we lean to more formal procedures rather than informal. We don't write everything down, so we're kind of a little bit more towards the middle there, but closer to being formal than informal. All right, how loyal we are to organization versus loyal to our career. Well, you know where the United States stand on this. You guys are going to change jobs many, many, many times in your life, and may even change occupations a few times. So we're pretty low when it comes to organizational loyalty in this country. There's many countries that when you get hired, you work for life for that company. They protect you. I mean, we're going to talk about why you might work for life and what you get back in return. But countries such as Japan, people have very high organizational loyalty. Cooperation versus competition. We saw that one of Japan's highest values was cooperation. And we saw in the United States, one of our highest values was competition. So completely different things. What's the goal of an organization? What's the goal of people in general? Americans like to compete. We don't necessarily like to get along. Unless we're influenced and rewarded to get along, we tend to not do that. Right, short-term versus long-term horizon. This one is kind of how long you look into the future. Some cultures look hundreds of years into the future when they're making decisions, and some countries tend to look only in the short term. That tends to be the United States because we tend to have this quarterly profit system where we're trying to beat numbers on Wall Street, and CEOs are thinking 3 months at a time. Okay. And then stability versus innovation. How much you value what was in the past versus how much you value what's in the future. Americans value completely what's in the future. We value progress and change. Anything that was in the past, we don't have much attachment to it and think that it can be done better than that. Whereas other countries and other cultures never stop looking back. It's one of the great reasons why you visit countries in Europe, because you go to some of these incredible cities in Europe and they haven't changed in 500 or 1,000 years. They're more stability oriented than we are, but we're more innovative than they are.